The morning fog rolled thick across Crescent Bay, turning the Oregon coastline into something from another world. Master Sergeant Rachel Torres stood at the edge of the tide, her German shepherd, Duke, nosing through the tangled kelp at her feet. The water was cold, February cold, the kind that made your bones ache even from 20 feet away. Rachel had been walking this beach every morning for 3 months now, ever since she'd come home. Home, the word still felt strange in her mouth. She was 42 years old, 20 years in the Marine Corps, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and a medical discharge that still burned like acid in her chest. Not because of the injury, a shattered ankle from a vehicle rollover that had healed as well as it was going to, but because of everything that came after. Duke barked, sharp and insistent. "What is it, boy?" Rachel limped toward him, her right foot dragging slightly in the sand. The limp was permanent. The doctors had been clear about that. The dog was pawing at something half buried in the sand, his tail rigid with excitement. Rachel knelt down, her knee protesting, and brushed away the wet sand. Metal, corners, something solid. "Back, Duke, back." She dug with both hands, the cold water soaking through her jeans. It took 10 minutes to uncover it fully. A metal chest, maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, covered in barnacles and rust. Old, really old. Rachel sat back on her heels, breathing hard. The chest had a corroded padlock holding it shut, but the salt water had done its work. When she twisted it, the lock crumbled in her hand. She should have waited, should have called someone. But she'd spent 20 years following orders, and right now, in this moment, she didn't answer to anyone. Rachel opened the chest. Inside, wrapped in disintegrating oilcloth, were bundles of letters tied with string. Beneath them, a military service book, the old kind from World War II, and at the very bottom a medal. Even tarnished and corroded, she recognized it instantly. The Medal of Honor. Rachel's hands trembled as she lifted it out. The ribbon was faded, the star tarnished green, but it was real. She'd seen enough of them in her career to know. The name in the service book was Technical Sergeant James Mitchell. Date of birth, March 15, 1922. Home of record, Crescent Bay, Oregon. Rachel sat in the sand, the medal heavy in her palm, and felt something shift inside her chest. A purpose, a mission. She had no idea it would cost her everything. The Crescent Bay Veterans Hall smelled like coffee, old carpet, and disappointment. Rachel pushed through the door with Duke at her side, the metal chest tucked under her arm. It was 10 a.m. on a Thursday, which meant the regular crowd would be here, the same dozen men who'd been meeting every week for the past 30 years. They looked up when she entered. Most looked away just as quickly. "Help you?" The voice came from Frank Holloway, a Vietnam vet with a beer gut and a permanent scowl. He was the unofficial president of the local VFW post, and he'd made his feelings about Rachel clear from her first visit. "I found something on the beach this morning," Rachel said, setting the chest on the nearest table. "I think it belonged to a local veteran, James Mitchell, Technical Sergeant, World War II. Frank didn't move, so I thought someone here might know about him, his family. This needs to get to the right people." She opened the chest, revealing the medal. The room went quiet. Then Frank laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. "You found a Medal of Honor on the beach, sure you did." "I'm serious." "Listen, lady." Frank stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we don't need you waltzing in here with some story about buried treasure. You want attention, go post it on Facebook with all the other hero wannabes." Rachel's jaw tightened. "I'm not looking for attention, I'm trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Frank's voice dripped with contempt. "You know what the right thing would have been? Staying in the Corps instead of taking the easy way out with a medical discharge. But I guess 20 years wasn't enough for you to learn about honor." The words hit like a physical blow. Rachel had heard variations of this before, at the VA hospital, at the grocery store, even from other veterans. The whispers, the assumptions. She'd been medically discharged, sure, but the rumors had followed her home, that she'd exaggerated her injury, that she'd wanted out, that she couldn't hack it anymore. None of it was true, but the truth didn't matter when people had already made up their minds. My injury was combat-related, Rachel said quietly. Documented and verified. I didn't choose to leave. Right, Frank crossed his arms. Just like you didn't choose to bring some fake medal in here to make yourself look important. I've been doing this for 40 years, tours. I know a glory hound when I see one. Duke growled low in his throat. Rachel put a hand on his head. This medal is real, she said, and James Mitchell deserves to have his story told. If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will. She closed the chest, tucked it back under her arm, and walked out. Behind her she heard Frank's voice, loud enough to carry. Good riddance. We don't need her kind here anyway. Outside, Rachel leaned against her truck and closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage. Pure, clean rage. 20 years. She'd given 20 years to the Corps. She'd led Marines through firefights, held dying men in her arms, earned every scar on her body and every nightmare in her head. And this was what she came home to. Duke pressed against her leg, warm and solid. It's okay, boy, she whispered. We're okay. But she wasn't sure she believed it. The Crescent Bay Public Library was quiet on Thursday afternoons. Rachel had always liked libraries. The order, the peace, the sense that knowledge was something you could hold in your hands if you just knew where to look. The librarian, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, looked up from her desk and smiled. It was the first genuine smile Rachel had received all day. Rachel, good to see you. Duke behaving himself. Always. Rachel approached the desk. Margaret, I need help with some local history research. World War II era. I'm looking for information on a soldier named James Mitchell. Margaret's expression shifted, surprise, then something else. Something careful. James Mitchell, she repeated. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. You know about him? I know of him. Margaret stood up, moving toward the back of the library. Come with me. She led Rachel to a corner where old newspapers were stored in filing cabinets, the kind that hadn't been digitized yet. Margaret pulled open a drawer labeled 1940-51950 and began flipping through folders. James Mitchell was from here, Margaret said, born and raised, enlisted right after Pearl Harbor. From what I understand, he was a good kid. Quiet. Worked at his father's fishing boat before the war. What happened to him? Margaret pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping and laid it on the table. The headline read, Local Hero Lost ATC. Rachel leaned closer, reading quickly. James Mitchell had been awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for actions in the Pacific Theater, something about holding a position against impossible odds, saving his entire platoon. He'd survived the war, come home to Crescent Bay in 1945, but 6 months later, his fishing boat had gone down in a storm. His body was never recovered. They held a memorial service, Margaret said softly, but there was nothing to bury. His mother died a few years later. No other family, the story just faded away. Rachel touched the newspaper, feeling the brittle paper beneath her fingers. Why didn't anyone remember him? People did for a while, but memories fade. New wars come, new heroes. Margaret looked at Rachel with something like sympathy. You found something, didn't you? Rachel nodded. She told Margaret about the chest, the letters, the medal. When she finished, Margaret was quiet for a long moment. There are people in this town who won't like you digging this up, she finally said. Frank Holloway already made that clear. Frank's an ass, Margaret said bluntly. But he's not the only one. There are families in Crescent Bay who have built their reputations on being the town's military legacy. The Holloways, the Prescotts, the Dunhams. They run the VFW, the American Legion, the town council. They decide who gets honored and who gets forgotten. This isn't about politics, Rachel said. This is about giving a dead soldier the recognition he earned. I know that, you know that, Margaret tapped the newspaper. But to them, you're an outsider coming in and challenging their authority, and you're a woman. And you left the military under circumstances they've decided to judge. You're already 3 strikes down. Rachel felt the familiar weight settling on her shoulders. So what do I do? You do what you came here to do, Margaret said firmly. You tell James Mitchell's story, but you do it carefully. Document everything. Get evidence. Don't give them any excuse to dismiss you. Rachel looked down at Duke, who was sitting patiently at her feet. The dog looked back at her with complete trust. I can do that, she said. Margaret smiled. I know you can. And Rachel, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. This town needs someone who actually cares about the truth. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to Rachel in months. That night, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, the chest open in front of her, and began reading the letters. They were love letters mostly. James Mitchell had written them to a woman named Sarah, no last name given. They were tender, hopeful, full of plans for after the war. A house, children, a life. Rachel read them slowly, carefully, her heart aching with every word. These weren't just historical documents. They were pieces of a man's soul. The last letter was different. It was dated November 1945, weeks before James died. The handwriting was shakier, the tone darker. Sarah, I can't stop seeing their faces. At night when I close my eyes, they're there. The men I killed, the men I couldn't save. People here treat me like a hero, but I don't feel like one. I feel like a ghost. Sometimes I think about taking the boat out and just keeping going. Out past the bay, past the shipping lanes, out where the ocean is so deep that nothing can touch you. But then I think about you, and I hold on a little longer. Yours, James. Rachel set the letter down, her throat tight. She knew that feeling, that specific weight, the kind that made you wonder if the world would be better off without you in it. She'd felt it herself, 3 months ago, standing on the same beach at 3 a.m. with Duke beside her. Duke had saved her that night, just by being there, just by needing her. We're going to tell his story, Rachel said aloud, her voice steady. He deserves that much. Duke's tail thumped against the floor. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The storm was coming in fast. The weather service had been warning about it all day. Rachel walked to the window and looked out at the darkness, at the distant lights of the town, at the ocean beyond. Somewhere out there, James Mitchell had gone down with his boat. Somewhere out there, his story had been lost. Not anymore. Rachel returned to the table, pulled out her laptop, and began to type. She documented everything, the chest, the letters, the medal, the newspaper articles. She took photographs. She made notes. She built a case. By midnight, she had a plan. By 1 a.m., she knew it was going to be harder than she thought. And by 2 a.m., when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, she knew it was going to get ugly. The message was short. Leave the past alone. You don't belong here. Rachel stared at the screen, her jaw set. Then she deleted the message, turned off her phone, and went back to work. They could try to scare her. They could mock her, dismiss her, threaten her. But she was a Marine. The Crescent Bay Gazette had been running out of the same brick building on Main Street since 1923. Rachel pushed through the front door on Friday morning, Duke at her side, and was immediately hit with the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. A young man at the front desk looked up, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the dog. Service animal, Rachel said before he could ask. I need to speak with someone about running a story. Sure, let me get. I'll handle this, Kevin. The voice came from a woman emerging from a side office. She was in her 50s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. I'm Susan Reeves, editor. You must be Rachel Torres. Rachel blinked. You know who I am. Small town. Susan gestured toward her office. Come on back, the dog's fine. Once they were seated, Susan folded her hands on her desk and studied Rachel with the intensity of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people. Frank Holloway called me yesterday, Susan said. Told me you'd brought some wild story into the VFW about finding buried treasure. Said you were looking for attention. Rachel's stomach sank. That's not what happened. I didn't think it was. Susan leaned back in her chair. Frank's been trying to control the narrative in this town for 30 years. He doesn't like it when someone challenges his authority, especially someone he can't bully. She paused. So, what really happened? Rachel told her everything. She showed her the photographs of the chest, the medal, the letters. She showed her Margaret's newspaper clippings. She laid out the whole story of James Mitchell, the hero who came home and was forgotten. When she finished, Susan was quiet for a long moment. This is a hell of a story, she finally said. Will you run it? Susan sighed. I want to, but I need to be honest with you, Rachel. This town has a complicated relationship with its past. The families who run things here, the Holloways, the Prescotts, they've built their identities around being the keepers of local military history. If you start asking questions about why James Mitchell was forgotten, you're going to step on some very powerful toes. I don't care whose toes I step on, Rachel said. This isn't about politics. It's about honoring a veteran who earned it. I know that, but Frank and his crowd won't see it that way. They'll see it as you trying to undermine them, make them look bad. Susan tapped her pen against the desk. And they'll come after you, hard. Let them. Susan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll run the story, but I need you to understand something. Once this is out there, there's no taking it back. Your life here is going to get a lot more difficult. It's already difficult, Rachel said quietly. Fair enough. Susan opened her laptop. Let's get started. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. Local veteran DISCOVRS WWAI Medal of Honor seeks to honor forgotten hero. Rachel read it 3 times, sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold. Susan had done a good job, fair, balanced, focused on the facts. She'd quoted Rachel extensively, included the photographs, and laid out the historical context of James Mitchell's service and death. By noon, Rachel's phone was ringing. The first call was from Margaret at the library, congratulating her. The second was from a woman who claimed to be a distant cousin of the Mitchell family, asking if she could see the letters. The third was from a reporter at the Portland Tribune, wanting to do a follow-up piece. The fourth call was from Frank Holloway. Rachel almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. You made a big mistake, Frank said without preamble. His voice was cold. Running to the newspaper like some kind of crusader. You think you're helping. You're embarrassing this entire community. I'm trying to honor a veteran, Rachel said evenly. You're trying to make yourself look important. That's all you've been doing since you showed up here. Playing the victim, acting like the world owes you something because you got hurt. Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. I never. Save it. I know your type. You couldn't hack it in the real military, so now you're trying to rewrite history to make yourself feel better. Well, it's not going to work. The VFW wants nothing to do with you or your little project. And if you had any sense, you'd pack up and leave town before you embarrass yourself further. The line went dead. Rachel sat very still, her heart pounding. Duke whined softly and pressed his nose against her hand. It's okay, she whispered. It's okay. Someone spray-painted liar across her truck in the grocery store parking lot. When she reported it to the police, the officer who took her statement was Frank Holloway's nephew. He wrote it up as vandalism, but his tone made it clear he didn't care. At the gas station, she overheard 2 women talking about her. Can you believe she's trying to make herself into some kind of hero? My husband served in Vietnam, and he would never pull a stunt like this." The cashier at the hardware store refused to serve her, claiming the register was broken. Rachel had to go to the next town over to buy supplies. And through it all, the phone calls kept coming. Some supportive, many hostile. People she'd never met called her a fraud, an attention seeker, a disgrace to the uniform. Rachel stopped answering the phone. But she didn't stop working. Margaret helped her dig deeper into James Mitchell's history. They found records of his enlistment, his unit assignments, his combat actions. They found the official Medal of Honor citation, buried in National Archives records. They found photographs. A young man with a nervous smile, standing on a dock with fishing nets behind him. They found Sarah. Her full name was Sarah Whitman. She'd been a teacher at Crescent Bay Elementary. She'd never married after James died. She'd lived alone in a small house on Maple Street until her death in 1987. She kept waiting for him, Margaret said softly, looking at a photograph of Sarah in her 80s standing in front of her house. All those years, she never moved on. Rachel touched the photograph. Did she know about the medal? I don't know. The ceremony was posthumous, held in Washington. His mother accepted it, but she was in poor health. Maybe Sarah never found out, or maybe she knew and it didn't matter because he was still gone. Rachel thought about the letters, the plans they'd made, the future that never came. "We need to find that medal ceremony," Rachel said. "Proof that it was real, something even Frank can't deny." Margaret nodded. "I'll keep digging." On Thursday, Rachel got a call from a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Is this Master Sergeant Torres?" The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is David Mitchell. I'm calling from Seattle. I think James Mitchell was my great-uncle." Rachel sat up straighter. "Your great-uncle?" "My grandmother was his sister. She died when I was young, but she used to talk about him, about how he disappeared after the war. I saw the article in the Gazette, someone sent it to me, and I had to call." "Did your grandmother ever mention the Medal of Honor?" There was a long pause. "No, she never mentioned that at all. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I have the medal. I have his service records, and I'm trying to make sure his story gets told properly." David's voice cracked slightly. "I'd like to help if I can, my family. We've always wondered what happened to him. My grandmother said he came back different from the war, quieter, sadder, and then he just vanished." Rachel explained about the fishing boat, the storm, the body never recovered. David listened in silence. "I'm coming to Crescent Bay," he said finally. "This weekend. I need to see this for myself." "I'll be here," Rachel said. When she hung up, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. David Mitchell arrived on Saturday. He was in his early 60s, a retired Boeing engineer with kind eyes and his great-uncle's same nervous smile. Rachel met him at the library, where Margaret had set up a small archive of everything they'd found. David went through it all slowly, carefully. The letters, the photographs, the medal. When he picked up the Medal of Honor, his hands trembled. "My God," he whispered, "it's real." "It's real," Rachel confirmed. David looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "Why did no one tell us? Why didn't anyone in the family know about this?" "I don't know," Rachel said gently. "Sometimes stories get lost. Sometimes people forget to pass them down, or maybe it was too painful." "We need to do something," David said. "We need to make this right." "I'm working on it, but I need to warn you, there are people in this town who don't want this story told. They're going to push back." David's jaw set in a way that reminded Rachel of every stubborn Marine she'd ever served with. Let them try. The pushback came faster than Rachel expected. On Monday morning, she received a letter from the Crescent Bay VFW Post. It was signed by Frank Holloway and the entire board. Dear Ms. Torres, it has come to our attention that you are making claims regarding a Medal of Honor allegedly belonging to Technical Sergeant James Mitchell. After careful consideration, the VFW board has determined that without conclusive proof of authenticity, we cannot support your efforts to promote this story. Furthermore, given questions surrounding the circumstances of your own military discharge, we believe it is inappropriate for you to position yourself as an authority on military honors and recognition. We ask that you cease your public campaign and return any military artifacts to proper authorities for verification. Respectfully, Frank Holloway, President. Crescent Bay VFW Post, 1847. Rachel read the letter twice, her vision blurring with rage. Questions surrounding her discharge, that was the line that broke her. She'd been medically discharged after a combat injury. There was nothing questionable about it, nothing shameful, but Frank was planting seeds of doubt, spreading the implication that she'd done something wrong. It was character assassination, pure and simple. Duke whined, sensing her distress. Rachel crumpled the letter in her fist. "They're not going to stop," she said aloud. "They're going to keep coming after me until I give up or leave town." But even as she said it, she knew she wasn't going anywhere. The town meeting was held on the first Wednesday of every month in the community center, a low building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs that squeaked. Rachel had never attended before. She'd never had a reason to. Now she did. She walked in at 7 p.m. with Duke at her side and David Mitchell beside her. The room was already half full, mostly older residents, the same crowd that ran everything in Crescent Bay. Frank Holloway sat in the front row, surrounded by his VFW cronies. When Rachel entered, the room went quiet. She found a seat in the back, her heart hammering. David sat beside her, his face pale but determined. The meeting started with routine business, budget discussions, permits, a debate about parking regulations. Rachel waited, her hands clenched in her lap. Finally, during the public comment period, she stood. "I'd like to address the council," she said. The mayor, a thin man in his 70s named Robert Prescott, looked up with obvious reluctance. "State your name and address." "Rachel Torres, 427 Ocean View Drive. I'm here to talk about James Mitchell." Frank Holloway turned in his seat, his expression dark. Rachel continued, her voice steady. "3 weeks ago, I found a Medal of Honor on Crescent Bay Beach. It belonged to Technical Sergeant James Mitchell, a local veteran who died in 1945. I've spent the past weeks researching his story, and I've discovered that despite earning our nation's highest military honor, he's been completely forgotten by this community." "Ms. Torres," Mayor Prescott interrupted, "this isn't the appropriate venue." "I believe it is," Rachel said firmly, "because I'm here to ask the town to do the right thing, to honor James Mitchell properly, to acknowledge his sacrifice, to tell his story." "We don't even know if your medal is real," Frank said, standing up. "You could have bought it online for all we know. You're asking this town to waste time and resources on your little fantasy." "I have documentation," Rachel said. "Service records, Medal of Honor citation, newspaper articles, and James Mitchell's great-nephew is here tonight to verify the family connection." David stood beside her. "My name is David Mitchell. James was my great-uncle, and I can confirm everything Ms. Torres has said. The medal is real, the story is real, and my family would be honored if this town chose to remember him." The room erupted in murmurs. Mayor Prescott banged his gavel. "Order, order, please." He looked at Rachel with something that might have been sympathy. "Ms. Torres, Mr. Mitchell, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but the council will need time to review the evidence and determine the appropriate course of action." "How much time?" Rachel asked. "These things take time," Prescott said vaguely. "We'll be in touch." With all due respect, sir, that's not good enough. James Mitchell has been waiting 79 years for recognition. How much longer does he have to wait? Frank stood again. You don't get to come into this town and start making demands. You've been here, what, 3 months? You don't know our history. You don't know our values. And frankly, given your own questionable service record, you don't have the moral authority to be lecturing anyone about honor. The words hung in the air like poison. Rachel's face burned. My service record is not questionable. I was medically discharged after a combat injury. Everything was documented and approved through proper channels. So you say, Frank said, but I've heard differently. I've heard you were looking for a way out, that you couldn't handle the pressure anymore. That's a lie. Is it? Then why won't you show us your discharge papers prove it? The room was dead silent. Rachel felt every eye on her. She thought about her DD-214 locked in a safe at home. She thought about the doctor's reports, the injury evaluations, the months of physical therapy. She thought about the night her Humvee rolled, the sound of metal tearing, the screaming. She thought about having to prove herself, over and over, to people who had already decided she was guilty. I don't owe you my medical records, Rachel said quietly. And this isn't about me. This is about James Mitchell. Everything's about you, though, isn't it? Frank's voice was cruel. The hero who washed up on our beach, the crusader for justice. You're using a dead man's story to make yourself feel important because you couldn't cut it in the real world. Rachel's vision tunneled. Her hands were shaking. Duke pressed against her leg, grounding her. I came here in good faith, Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. I found something that belonged to someone who deserved better than to be forgotten. I tried to do the right thing, and you've done nothing but attack me for it. Because you're a fraud, Frank said flatly, and everyone in this room knows it. Rachel looked around the room. Some people looked uncomfortable, some looked away, but no one spoke up. She'd lost before she'd even begun. Come on, David, she said. We're done here. They walked out together, Duke between them, and the door closed on a room full of whispers. Outside, the night air was cold and damp. Rachel stood on the steps of the community center, her chest tight, fighting to breathe. That was brutal, David said quietly. That was nothing, Rachel said. That's just how it is. We can't let them win. Rachel laughed, a harsh sound. They already won. They control the town. They control the narrative. We're outsiders. We don't matter. James matters. The words hit Rachel like a slap. She turned to look at David, this 60-year-old engineer who'd driven 4 hours to fight for a great uncle he'd never met. He does, she said softly. He does matter. Then we keep fighting. Rachel wanted to believe him, but she was so tired, tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of being called a liar and a fraud by people who didn't know the first thing about her. I need to think, she said. I'll call you tomorrow. David nodded, squeezed her shoulder and walked to his car. Rachel stood alone in the parking lot, Duke sitting patiently beside her, and felt the weight of the world pressing down. Rachel woke at 3 a.m. to Duke barking furiously. She stumbled out of bed, her ankles screaming in protest, and looked out the window. Someone had thrown eggs at her house. The windows were covered in yolk and shell, dripping in the moonlight. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. She grabbed her phone, took photographs, and called the police. The same officer as before showed up 40 minutes later, took a half-hearted report, and told her it was probably just kids. Kids, Rachel repeated. Happens sometimes, the officer said with a shrug. Small town, people get bored. After he left, Rachel stood on her porch and looked at the mess. Dawn was still hours away. The street was empty, silent. She thought about packing up, leaving, going somewhere else where no one knew her and no one cared. But then she thought about James Mitchell, going down with his boat in a storm, and how easy it would be to just let the ocean take you. She thought about the letters to Sarah, the desperate hope in them, the plans for a future that never came. She thought about Duke, who'd saved her life by simply being there when she needed him most. And she thought, not yet, not like this. Rachel went back inside, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with James Mitchell's medal in front of her. "I'm not giving up on you," she said aloud. "I promise." "I got a cease and desist letter," she said without preamble, "from a lawyer representing Frank Holloway and the VFW. They're claiming your story constitutes defamation and demanding a retraction." Rachel's stomach dropped. "On what grounds?" "They claim you're making false statements about the medal's authenticity and implying the VFW has been negligent in honoring local veterans. It's bullshit, but it's expensive bullshit. My publisher is nervous." "Are you going to retract the story?" There was a long pause. "I don't want to, but Rachel, I have to be practical. If they sue, it could bankrupt the paper. We're barely hanging on as it is." "So they win." "I didn't say that." Susan's voice hardened. "I said I have to be practical. What I need from you is ironclad proof. Documentation that's so airtight they can't possibly dispute it. Can you get that?" Rachel looked at the papers spread across her table, the service records, the citations, the photographs. "I can try." "Then try fast. I'll hold them off as long as I can, but I can't fight this battle alone." Rachel called Margaret, who called a friend at the National Archives. She called David, who started digging through his family's old documents. She called the Marine Corps Historical Division, the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, and 3 different military museums. For 5 days she barely slept. She worked from dawn until midnight, chasing down leads, verifying facts, building an unassailable case. On the 6th day, she got the email she'd been waiting for. It was from the Medal of Honor Historical Society, with attachments. Rachel opened the first file and felt her heart stop. It was a photograph from 1945, the official Medal of Honor ceremony for James Mitchell. There he was in his dress uniform, standing in front of a flag, while a general pinned the medal to his chest. The caption confirmed the date, the location, the recipient. The second file was the official citation, signed and sealed. The third file was a list of Medal of Honor recipients, with James Mitchell's name clearly listed. Rachel sat back in her chair and laughed. It was a wild, slightly unhinged sound, but she couldn't help it. She had proof, real, documented, undeniable proof. She forwarded everything to Susan, to David, and to the mayor's office. Frank Holloway himself showed up at her door 2 days later. Rachel saw him through the window and debated not answering, but something made her open the door. He looked older than he had at the town meeting, smaller. "We need to talk," he said. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other." "Please," the word seemed to cost him something, 5 minutes. Rachel stepped aside and let him in, though every instinct screamed at her not to. Duke growled low in his throat until Rachel told him to stand down. Frank stood in her living room, looking around at the research scattered across every surface, the documents, the photographs, the timeline she'd built on poster board. "You really did your homework," he said quietly. "I'm a Marine," Rachel said. "We don't do things halfway." Frank nodded slowly. He seemed to be struggling with something. Finally, he said, "I owe you an apology." Rachel blinked. "What?" "I was wrong about you, about the medal, about a lot of things." He met her eyes. "The evidence you provided to the mayor's office is conclusive. James Mitchell did earn the Medal of Honor, and he deserves to be honored." Rachel didn't know what to say. Frank continued, "I let my pride get in the way. I've been running the VFW for 20 years and I thought I knew everything about this town's military history. When you showed up with this story, it felt like you were saying I'd failed, that I'd missed something important, and instead of listening, I attacked you. "You did more than attack me," Rachel said quietly. "You tried to destroy my reputation. You spread lies about my service." "I know," Frank looked down at his hands, "and I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I called everyone I'd talked to and set the record straight, told them I was wrong, but I know that doesn't undo the damage." "No," Rachel said, "it doesn't." They stood in awkward silence. Finally, Frank said, "The VFW wants to make this right. We'd like to host a memorial service for James Mitchell, present the medal to his family, tell his story properly, and we'd like you to be part of it, if you're willing." Rachel studied his face, looking for the trap, but all she saw was a tired old man who'd finally run out of fight. "I'll think about it," she said. Frank nodded. "That's fair." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Tors, you're a hell of a Marine. I should have recognized that from the start." After he left, Rachel sat down heavily on her couch and put her head in her hands. Duke rested his chin on her knee. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We actually did it." But the victory felt hollow, because she knew the truth. This wasn't about Frank changing his mind. This was about her beating him with evidence so overwhelming he couldn't ignore it. The memorial service was scheduled for Memorial Day weekend, 3 months after Rachel had found the chest on the beach. 3 months that felt like a lifetime. The town threw itself into preparations with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from guilt and the desire to be seen doing the right thing. Suddenly, everyone had known about James Mitchell all along. Everyone had family stories about the Mitchell family. Everyone wanted to be part of honoring the forgotten hero. Rachel watched it happen with a mixture of cynicism and exhaustion. But David Mitchell was genuinely happy, and that helped. "I can't believe this is really happening," he said over coffee at the diner. It was a Tuesday morning, and Rachel had driven up to meet him as he finalized arrangements. "My grandmother would have been so proud." "She would have," Rachel agreed, "and James would be too." David smiled, but it faded quickly. "Have you decided if you're going to speak at the service?" Rachel stirred her coffee. Frank had asked her 3 times now. The VFW wanted her on stage, wanted her to tell the story of finding the medal, wanted her to be the face of this redemption narrative. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to, but part of me feels like this should be about James, not about me." "It can be both," David said gently. "You're part of the story now. You made this happen." "A lot of people made this happen. Margaret did most of the research. Susan ran the story when it would have been easier not to. You drove down here and stood by me when everyone else thought I was crazy. But you started it. You're the one who opened that chest and decided it mattered." David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You gave my family back a piece of our history. That means something." Margaret organized a display at the library, photographs, letters, and historical context about World War II and the Pacific Theater. Local high school students volunteered to help research James Mitchell's unit and create a timeline of his service. Susan ran a series of articles in the Gazette, profiling different aspects of James's life: his childhood in Crescent Bay, his fishing career, his war service, his relationship with Sarah Whitman. Each article ended with a reminder of the upcoming memorial. And slowly, painfully, the town began to remember. An elderly woman came to Rachel's house one afternoon with a photograph. "This is James and Sarah at the church picnic, 1942, she said, her hands trembling as she held it out. "I was just a girl then, but I remember them. They were so in love." A man in his 80s called to say he'd fished with James's father back in the day. "The whole family took it hard when the boat went down," he said. "Some people said James did it on purpose, that he couldn't live with what he'd seen in the war, but I never believed that. I think it was just bad luck. Wrong place, wrong storm." Each story was a piece of the puzzle. Each memory brought James Mitchell a little more into focus. There was a contingent in town, small but vocal, who resented the attention being given to James Mitchell. Why him and not other local veterans? Why dredge up the past? Why let an outsider dictate what the town should care about? Rachel heard the whispers, saw the looks. One afternoon, she ran into a woman named Patricia Dunham at the post office. Patricia was the wife of the former VFW president and a fixture in local society. "I hope you're pleased with yourself," Patricia said coldly. Rachel paused, her package in hand. "Excuse me. You've turned this town upside down with your little crusade. People are fighting. Families are divided, all because you needed to play hero." "I'm not playing anything," Rachel said evenly. "I'm honoring a veteran who deserved better." "James Mitchell was honored," Patricia snapped. "He had a memorial service. His name is on the war memorial in the park. But that wasn't good enough for you, was it? You had to make it into a spectacle." "His name isn't on the war memorial," Rachel said. "I checked." Patricia's face flushed. "Well, it should be. That's an oversight. But it doesn't change the fact that you're using a dead man to make yourself feel important." Rachel felt the familiar anger rising, but she kept her voice level. "I'm sorry you see it that way, but this memorial is happening whether you like it or not. And if you can't support it, then at least have the decency to stay out of the way." She walked out before Patricia could respond, her hands shaking. Duke was waiting in the truck, and he greeted her with his usual enthusiasm, oblivious to the weight she was carrying. "One fight at a time," Rachel muttered, scratching behind his ears. "One fight at a time." 2 weeks before the memorial, Rachel received a call from the commandant of the Marine Corps office. She almost didn't answer. The number was DC-based, and she'd gotten used to ignoring unknown calls. But something made her pick up. "Master Sergeant Torres, this is Colonel Andrea Hayes from the commandant's office. Do you have a moment?" Rachel's heart stopped. "Yes, ma'am." "We've been following the story about James Mitchell. It's received quite a bit of attention in military circles. The commandant would like to send a representative to attend the memorial service and present a letter of commendation on behalf of the Marine Corps." Rachel had to sit down. That would be an honor, ma'am. Additionally, the commandant was impressed by your initiative and dedication in bringing Sergeant Mitchell's story to light. He wanted me to tell you personally that the Marine Corps is proud of the work you've done." Rachel's eyes burned. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than I can say." "You're a credit to the Corps, Master Sergeant. Semper Fi." "Semper Fi, ma'am." When the call ended, Rachel sat in silence for a long moment. Then she put her face in her hands and cried, not from sadness but from relief, from validation, from the knowledge that someone who mattered, saw her for who she really was. Duke pressed against her legs, warm and steady. "We did good, boy," she whispered. "We did good." The final week before the memorial was chaos. The VFW hall was being prepared for a reception. The local cemetery had donated a plot for a memorial stone. A local sculptor had volunteered to create a bronze plaque. The high school band was practicing military honors. Rachel found herself in the middle of it all, coordinating between David, the VFW, the town council, and the Marine Corps representative who would be attending. It was exhausting, but it was also purpose. For the first time since her discharge, Rachel felt like she was doing something that mattered. 3 days before the memorial, Susan Reeves called with news. "We got picked up by the AP," she said, barely containing her excitement. "The story's going national. I've had calls from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN." Rachel's stomach dropped. National. "It's a great story, Rachel. Forgotten veteran, Medal of Honor found by chance. Small town comes together to honor him. It hits all the right notes." "I don't want this to become a circus," Rachel said. "I know, and I've been careful about who I talk to, but people want to know about James Mitchell, and they want to know about you. It's not about me. I know that, but you're part of the story whether you like it or not. The veteran who found another veteran and fought to honor him. It's powerful. Rachel closed her eyes. I just want to get through Sunday. You will, Susan said gently. And Rachel, you should be proud. You did something extraordinary. Saturday night, the night before the memorial, Rachel couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, while Duke snored softly on the floor beside her. Her mind was racing, going over the speech she'd finally agreed to give, worrying about logistics, second-guessing every decision. At 2 a.m., she gave up and got out of bed. The medal was in its case on her dresser. Rachel picked it up and carried it to the living room, where moonlight streamed through the windows. She sat on the couch and opened the case, looking at the tarnished star. I hope I did right by you, she said quietly. I hope this is what you would have wanted. The medal gleamed in the moonlight, silent and eternal. Rachel thought about James Mitchell, the boy who'd fished these waters, the soldier who'd fought in the Pacific, the man who'd come home broken and lost. She thought about Sarah Whitman, waiting for a love that would never return. She thought about the letters, the dreams, the future that drowned in a storm. And she thought about herself, the Marine who'd given 20 years, who'd come home broken in different ways, who'd found purpose in the most unexpected place. We're not so different, you and I, she whispered, both just trying to find our way home. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, eternal and patient. Rachel closed the case gently and sat in the darkness, waiting for dawn. Memorial Day dawned clear and bright over Crescent Bay, the kind of perfect Pacific Northwest morning that made you believe in second chances. Rachel woke early, her stomach tight with nerves. She'd laid out her uniform the night before, dress blues, perfectly pressed, ribbons and medals aligned with precision. She hadn't worn it since her discharge ceremony 9 months ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she buttoned the jacket. You've got this, she told her reflection. You've given speeches before. You've led Marines into combat. You can do this. But her reflection looked uncertain. Duke whined from the doorway, sensing her anxiety. Come here, boy. Rachel knelt down, ignoring the protest from her ankle, and buried her face in his fur. Just a few more hours, then it's done. The dog licked her face, patient and loyal. Rachel stood, adjusted her uniform one final time, and headed out. The memorial service was being held in Veterans Park, a small green space overlooking the ocean. By the time Rachel arrived at 9 a.m., the park was already filling with people, veterans in their dress uniforms, families with children, elderly residents who remembered the war years, reporters with cameras. Rachel parked and took a deep breath. A Marine Corps staff car was parked near the entrance. The representative had arrived. Rachel walked toward the gathering crowd, Duke at her side, and felt every eye turn toward her. Some looks were friendly, some were curious, some were still skeptical. Frank Holloway approached, looking uncomfortable in his VFW uniform. Tours, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, Rachel said evenly. Listen, before this starts, I want you to know, Frank paused, struggling. You were right about all of it, and I was wrong. I let my ego get in the way of doing what was right. Rachel studied him. The apology seemed genuine, but the wounds were still raw. I appreciate that. I mean it. What you did, standing up to me, to the whole town, refusing to back down, that took guts. That took honor, and I should have recognized it from the start. Rachel nodded slowly. Thank you. Frank extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Rachel shook it. Let's give James Mitchell the service he deserves, Frank said. The mayor spoke first, offering official words of welcome and recognition. Then came the high school band, playing a haunting rendition of the Marine Corps hymn that made Rachel's throat tight. David Mitchell spoke next, his voice breaking as he talked about the great uncle he'd never known, about family stories passed down, about the hole in their history that was finally being filled. Then it was Rachel's turn. She walked to the podium on trembling legs, Duke remaining at her seat. The crowd was larger than she'd expected, easily 200 people, maybe more, cameras, reporters, veterans standing at attention. Rachel gripped the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. "My name is Rachel Torres," she began. "I'm a master sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, retired. 3 months ago, I was walking on the beach with my service dog when we found a metal chest half buried in the sand." She told the story slowly, carefully, hitting every detail. Finding the chest, opening it, discovering the metal and letters, the research, the resistance, the fight to make people care. "I won't lie to you," she said. "This hasn't been easy. There were people who doubted me, people who attacked my character, questioned my service, told me to give up and go away. There were times I wanted to, times I wondered if it was worth it." Rachel paused, looking out at the crowd. She found Frank Holloway, who met her eyes without flinching. She found Patricia Dunham, who looked away. She found Margaret Chen, who smiled encouragement. "But then I'd think about James Mitchell," Rachel continued. "About a young man who answered his country's call, who fought with courage and honor, who earned the Medal of Honor through actions so brave that his entire platoon owed him their lives, and who came home to a nation that was ready to forget him before his body was even cold." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "James Mitchell deserved better," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger. "He deserved to be remembered. He deserved to have his story told. He deserved to have his sacrifice honored not just in the moment, but for generations to come." She looked down at her notes, then pushed them aside. The words she needed weren't written down. "I'm a veteran. I served 20 years in the Marine Corps. I led Marines in combat. I was injured in service to my country and I was medically discharged. And when I came home, I found a world that didn't quite know what to do with me. People who questioned my service, who doubted my sacrifice, who assumed that because I was broken, I was somehow less." Rachel's voice caught, but she pushed through. "Finding James Mitchell's medal gave me something I desperately needed, a purpose, a mission, a reminder that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It's a lifelong commitment to honor, to integrity, to standing up for what's right even when it's hard." She paused, gathering herself. James Mitchell didn't get to grow old. He didn't get to marry Sarah Whitman or have children or watch the sunset from his fishing boat. He died at 23, alone in a storm, carrying ghosts no one else could see. But his story matters. His service matters. His sacrifice matters. Rachel looked directly at the camera, knowing her words would reach beyond this small town. To every veteran who feels forgotten, who feels like their service doesn't matter, who feels like no one sees them, you matter. Your service matters. Your sacrifice matters. And there are people who will fight for you, who will stand up for you, who will make sure your story is told. She stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. The Marine Corps representative, a colonel named James Patterson, stepped forward next. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons. "On behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps and all Marines past and present," Colonel Patterson said, his voice carrying across the park, "I present this letter of commendation to the family of Technical Sergeant James Mitchell, posthumously recognizing his extraordinary valor and selfless service to our nation." He handed the framed letter to David Mitchell, who accepted it with tears streaming down his face. Then the colonel turned to Rachel. "Master Sergeant Torres, the Commandant has asked me to convey his personal thanks for your dedication in bringing Sergeant Mitchell's story to light. Your actions exemplify the core values of the Marine Corps: honor, courage, and commitment. Semper Fidelis." "Semper Fi, sir," Rachel managed, her voice barely above a whisper. The colonel saluted her. Rachel returned it, her hands sharp and precise despite the tears blurring her vision. The final act of the ceremony was the unveiling of the memorial stone. It had been placed near the existing war memorial, a simple granite marker with James Mitchell's name, rank, dates of service, and a single line, Medal of Honor recipient. A hero forgotten. A hero remembered. As the cloth was pulled away, the crowd erupted in applause. The high school band played taps, the mournful notes drifting across the park and out over the ocean. Rachel stood at attention, her hand over her heart, and thought about a young man walking into those same waters 79 years ago, never to return. "Rest easy, Marine," she whispered. "Your duty is done, we have the watch." The reception afterward was held at the VFW hall, packed wall-to-wall with people. Rachel found herself surrounded by veterans, families, reporters, all wanting to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her their own stories. It was overwhelming. Susan Reeves found her in a quiet corner, nursing a glass of water. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted. "It doesn't feel real yet." "You did an amazing thing," Susan said. "You should be proud." "I just opened a box on the beach," Rachel said. "Everything else was just refusing to give up." "That's what courage is," Susan said gently. "Not some grand, heroic gesture, just refusing to give up when it would be easier to walk away." Rachel thought about that, about all the times over the past 3 months when walking away would have been easier, when giving up would have made sense. "I guess you're right," she said finally. As the afternoon wore on, people began to drift away. David Mitchell found Rachel outside, where she was sitting on a bench with Duke beside her, looking out at the ocean. "Thank you," David said simply, sitting down next to her, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You gave my family back a piece of our history. You gave my great-uncle the honor he deserved. And you did it when no one was supporting you, when everyone was telling you to quit. That takes something special." Rachel looked down at her hands. "I didn't do it alone." "No, but you started it. You were the catalyst, and that matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the waves roll in. "What will you do now?" David asked eventually. Rachel hadn't thought about it. For 3 months, her entire focus had been on this moment. She hadn't considered what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess, live my life, figure out what comes next." "Will you stay in Crescent Bay?" Rachel looked back at the VFW hall, at the people still mingling, at the town that had fought her so hard before finally accepting her. "Yeah," she said slowly. "I think I will. It's home now, for better or worse." David smiled. "Good, because this town needs someone like you, someone who won't back down, someone who fights for what's right." That evening, after everyone had left and the park was empty again, Rachel returned to the beach where she'd found the chest. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The tide was coming in, washing away footprints, smoothing the sand clean. Rachel walked to the water's edge, Duke running ahead of her, and stood looking out at the endless ocean. Somewhere out there, James Mitchell's boat had gone down. Somewhere out there, he'd made the choice, whether intentional or not, to let the ocean take him. But his story hadn't drowned with him. It had survived, preserved in salt and metal and paper, waiting 79 years to be found. Rachel thought about the letters to Sarah, the love that had never gotten its happy ending, the plans that had never come to fruition. "I hope you found peace," she said aloud, her words carried away by the wind. "I hope wherever you are you know that you mattered, that you're remembered, that you're honored." The ocean whispered back, endless and eternal. Rachel stood there for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. She thought about her own journey, the 20 years of service, the injury, the discharge, the dark months that followed. The morning she'd stood on this beach with Duke and wondered if it was worth continuing. She'd found her answer in a metal chest, half buried in the sand. Sometimes purpose finds you in the strangest places. Sometimes the mission you need is the one you stumble across by accident. Sometimes saving someone else's story is how you save your own. Rachel turned away from the ocean and walked back up the beach, Duke trotting happily beside her. Her ankle ached. Her body was tired, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She was home. She had a purpose. And she had finally proven, to the town, to the doubters, but most importantly to herself, that she was exactly who she'd always been: a Marine, a warrior, someone who refused to leave a fallen comrade behind, even if that comrade had been gone for 79 years. As she reached her truck, Rachel looked back one final time at the ocean, at the beach, at the place where everything had changed. "Semper Fi, James Mitchell," she said softly, "until Valhalla." Then she climbed into her truck, Duke in the passenger seat, and drove home through the gathering twilight.